Hi guys, Kate here, and I am going to answer a question from Donna in Kansas City. Donna asks, Dear dietitians, I keep hearing about people tracking macros to manage their weight. What are macros? Well, Donna, this is a great question, and I'm so excited to answer it today. This is a foundational topic for understanding nutrition, so it's a great one to start with. So, macros is short for the word macronutrients. These are nutrients that our body needs in large quantities in order to function optimally, hence the prefix macro, which means large. There are three main macronutrients. They are fat, protein, and carbohydrates. And each macronutrient provides a specific amount of energy, and that's measured in calories. So fat provides 9 calories per gram, whereas protein and carbohydrates each provide 4 calories per gram. So fat's giving you about double the amount of energy that protein or carbohydrates would. All of the foods that we eat are made up of these macronutrients, and it's either in a singular sense or they're combined. So for example, sugar is purely a carbohydrate, whereas beans are part carbohydrate and part protein. So now that we've talked a little bit about what macros are, let's break down each category and talk about it specifically. The first macronutrient I'm going to talk about is fat. Calories from fat should comprise about 20 to 35% of our total energy. So I know that's a wide range, but that's because each person's body processes these nutrients differently and needs a different amount. That's why nutrition is so individual. So with our fat sources, quality definitely matters. The different types of fat will produce different reactions inside of our body. So there are 3 main types of fat. The first I'll talk about is unsaturated fat. The molecules in this type of fat have a bent structure, so it makes that type of fat a liquid at room temperature. These types of fat are oils. Some examples of this would be olive oil, canola oil, and sesame oil. These are considered heart healthy because that bent structure that makes the fat a liquid at room temperature also makes it a liquid inside of your body, so it's prone not to build up in your arteries and create plaques. They can be a little bit unstable though, so these fats do tend to spoil more quickly. The next type of fat is saturated fat. So saturated fat is typically found in animal products. It's also found in some nuts. So this would be like the fat that you see on meats, the fat that you find in dairy products, cheese, butter, and also some of those nuts would be like a macadamia nut or a cashew. Of course, saturated fat is found in cashews because they're the most delicious nut objectively. This molecule in a saturated fat is straight. So those molecules can stack really neatly on top of one another and create a solid structure. And that solid structure makes the fat solid at room temperature. So that's why you can see butter staying solid, or the fat on a meat, it actually just stays there. The problem with that is that this fat can be considered less heart healthy because that buildup can happen inside of your body and create plaques in your arteries, narrowing your blood vessels and arteries and making you more prone to heart disease. So these should be consumed in moderation. We typically recommend that saturated fat comprises 10% or less of your calories per day. The last type of fat I'm going to talk about today is trans fat. Trans fat is a type of unsaturated fat that has hydrogen molecules added to it artificially to make it a saturated fat. The reason this would be done is because we want that fat to stay more stable. Remember how I said earlier that an unsaturated fat can go rancid? Well, if we have a product that we want sitting on the shelf for a long period of time, we want it to stay good for a long period of time. So that's why these hydrogen molecules were added to the fat. Unfortunately, this type of fat has been determined by research to be very unhealthy for the heart. It can cause an increase in LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, and a decrease in HDL, which is the good cholesterol. So trans fats are something that we want to avoid at all costs. Okay, next, let's talk about protein. Protein should comprise somewhere between 10 and 35% of your diet, depending on your goals and your body's needs. Protein allows your body to grow, to repair tissues, it can function as hormones in our body, and it protects our lean body mass. Lean body mass is the muscle mass that you have on your body, and it's associated with a lot of positive outcomes, so we definitely want to protect that on our body. That being said, proteins are really important food, the important macronutrient to have in our diet. So proteins are made from individual amino acids linked together in long chains. And there are 2 different types of amino acids. There are essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids. Non-essential amino acids are amino acids that our body can produce itself, so we don't need to eat those. But essential amino acids need to be consumed in foods because our body can't make them. So we have different types of protein foods that contain essential amino acids and some that don't contain all of them. A food that contains all essential amino acids is called a complete protein. Some examples of these would be meat, fish, poultry, dairy products, etc. They are also known as proteins that have a high biological value. So that's something that we definitely need to have in our diet. Now, foods that don't contain all of the essential amino acids are called incomplete proteins. Now, an incomplete protein can still be really beneficial for our body. It just cannot be the sole source of protein that we eat. So some examples of an incomplete protein are collagen protein powder or beans. They're great sources of protein, definitely an easy way to increase our protein intake, but they don't contain all of those essential amino acids. So if we use that as our sole protein food, we would have some problems. But last but not least, let's talk about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are pretty controversial, but they are essential for a balanced diet, and that cannot be argued. Many of our body's organs need carbohydrates to function optimally, and the number one organ that I think about when I say that is our brain. Our brain runs off of carbohydrates, so it needs those to function at its highest capacity. All carbohydrates are broken down into glucose before they're used by the body, and our body really doesn't digest carbohydrates with morality. So once that glucose molecule is inside of you, your body does not know if it came from a brown rice or if it came from a Skittle. Foods will be digested at different rates, and it will affect our sensation of fullness, also called satiety, and it can affect our blood sugar levels. So the body can synthesize glucose from proteins if we aren't eating enough carbohydrates. But this process can be energy consuming, and it can be hard on the kidneys if it's done too much. So now let's talk a little bit about the categories of carbohydrates. First, let's talk about fiber. This is a type of carbohydrate that cannot be digested by our body's GI tract. It's typically found in plant foods, and it can increase our sensation of fullness and satiety, and it creates really nice bowel movements, which is something that we all want in this life. Next, we'll talk about complex carbohydrates. So complex carbohydrates are long strands of glucose molecules linked together. This would be found in starches like potatoes or in grains like rice. They usually have a savory taste. So these complex carbohydrates take longer to be broken down by our body. So that means that they make us feel full for a longer period of time, and they create a slower rise in our blood glucose as that glucose is more slowly digested and released into the body. Complex carbohydrates usually contain fiber unless they have been processed to remove the fiber. Some examples of foods that have had the fiber removed are white flour or like Wonder Bread. So these foods are going to be processed more like a simple carbohydrate, even though they don't have that sweet taste that we typically associate with simple carbohydrates. So that being said, we always want to put our focus on those complex carbohydrates with fiber. Those are going to make us feel full for a long time. They're going to keep our blood sugar stable, and they're going to create those nice bowel movements that we like while also providing energy. Now, simple carbohydrates are usually 1 or 2 glucose molecules linked together. So as you can imagine, that's digested more quickly, and the glucose is released into our bloodstream more quickly. Some examples of this are sugar, honey, milk, and fruit. So they're typically associated with that sweet taste. Since the sugar is easy to break down and it goes into the blood very quickly, it can cause a very fast spike in our blood sugar, which subsequently causes a fast decline in blood sugar. So while these aren't something that we want to be having all the time, there's definitely an important place for them in our diet. So I don't say this to say sugar is bad. We need those types of foods too. There are times that we can have both, but keep your focus on complex carbohydrates. So that's kind of a basic overview of the 3 main macronutrients. In later videos, we're going to work together and break down all of those macronutrients in even more detail than what I just did and talk about them to a further extent. But I hope that answered your question. Thank you so much for sending that in, and I look forward to talking to you guys again soon. Bye.